In today's episode, I explore my curiosity with Miles Morales. Yes, the Puerto Rican and Black American Spider-Man. Now, I'm only into him because my husband is a big comic book fan. And lucky for me, I have the inside scoop on unpacking my curiosity with Miles because one of my former colleagues is helping to develop that character. Today's guest is David Betancourt. He's the former comic book culture writer for The Washington Post. He's helped shape Miles Morales' character in books like Spider-Man Stories from the Spiderverse, which is his latest. And he also has a personal relationship with the character. Like Miles, David is also Puerto Rican and Black American. I had so much fun talking to David about Miles Morales, so let's get into my curiosity. What's up with Miles Morales featuring David Betancourt? Hey, David.
Hey, Jen, how are you?
I'm doing good. How are you doing?
It's great to see you again, former Washington Post colleague, doing big things.
Listen, let's get into that since you brought it up, okay? So,
oh man, did I make a mistake? Should I have not brought up the Washington Post? I'm sorry.
No,
but that is how we know each other. That is
how we know each other. That is how you met me. So I was fresh out of college. This is 2006, fresh out of college. And maybe, what was it, like July? Maybe July,
it was
August,
summertime.
something like that.
Summertime, yeah.
Starting at the Washington Post as a coveted news copy aide at the time, where those roles were just sort of floating around the news.
I was a news aide too back then.
You
That's
were
probably how we ended up
well.
bumping into each other.
It's exactly how we bumped into each other. So good to see you, former WAPO colleague.
Yeah, man, look at us. We made it.
I know. We made it. We're living the dream. We made it. So speaking of the Washington Post, you were there for how many years total?
17
years, most notably, at least for me, as a writer of all things comics. Do I have that correct? Should I say Marvel Comics or all things comics?
No, it was, my official beat was comic book culture. So I wrote about all aspects of comic book culture. So basically that's anything in entertainment that derives from a comic book. It could be a movie, it could be animation, it could be a podcast, it could be anything. Because when I started writing about comics at the Post, I was basically beating the drum saying, hey, this is about to take over Hollywood in more than one platform. We should, write about it.
So we're here to talk about one particular comic book character that I am fascinated by. His name is Miles Morales. And I know that ever since his inception in 2011, let me know if that's correct. His inception in 2011, his creation in 2011, you have been all over this character. In terms of your personal interest, in terms of professional interest as well. Tell me about Miles Morales. Who is he?
So, as of this moment right now in 2024, Miles Morales is easily one of the most identifiable and popular characters in pop culture entertainment. That can be from a comic book standpoint. That can be from a theatrical movie standpoint. It can be from a video game standpoint. Miles is everywhere. He is a Marvel Comics character. He is a Spider-Man. And his whole big thing when he burst onto the scene, USA Today actually had the exclusive on that announcement. Why it was a big deal is because he was the new Spider-Man in Marvel's Ultimate Universe. So Marvel had their standard universe that had been there since the beginning, back in the 60s, Fantastic Four, Avengers. And then they created this new thing in the 2000s called the Ultimate Universe, where they could take those same characters and do new ideas with them. So Miles initially existed in that Ultimate Comics Marvel universe. So there was a Spider-Man in that universe. He was a teenager, Peter Parker. They killed him in order to make the way for Miles Morales. It was very controversial at the time. Those Ultimate Spider-Man comic books, which were written by Brian Michael Bendis, Miles' co-creator, and illustrated by Mark Bagley, were my favorite Spider-Man comics ever. And I was very angry when they killed that character. So angry that I wrote about it. You can probably find that essay somewhere online, because I basically said, what are you doing? I can't believe this. And when that Peter Parker died, Marvel Comics had a new image of the new Spider-Man on the last page. It said, hey, we know Peter's dead, but there's a new Spider-Man coming. And all you saw was the suit, the black and red suit. That was it. So me, just going off the last, at that time I was 31 years old, going off my entire life of reading comics. My father was a comic collector. I used to read all his comics from the 60s and 70s. Just going off of history, I assumed, because they didn't say who was underneath the mask. They just said new Spider-Man. So all you saw was the costume. You couldn't see who was underneath it. This is why Spider-Man is such a big deal, the way his suit is, and why so many people feel anybody can be him, because you can't see the color of his skin. So when I saw that picture, I was convinced that, I was like, well, they have to make him different looking than Peter Parker. So I just assumed he was going to be white and blonde. And, Peter Parker's a brunette, brown hair guy, brown eyes. I'm like, how are they going to make this guy different? Okay, blonde hair, blue eyes, and look like Captain America underneath. So not to say I wasn't excited about it, but I was like, that's who you killed this really great character for? Obviously, spoiler alert, I was very surprised to see that it was me that was underneath the mask. And when I say that, I mean, they went out of their way to say this is a Black and a Latino kid. Now, the initial reports, when they came out, they said, okay, we've got this new Spider-Man, and he's Black and he's Latino. He's got a Latino parent and a Black parent. Because mainstream media, especially, it's getting better, but mainstream media, not the most diverse place on the planet. So the reporters that were reporting on this stuff weren't from the Latino community. So nobody bothered to ask, what type of Latino? The first reporter to actually get that info out of Brian Michael Bendis, as far as I can recollect, was me. And this is when I first started writing about comics at the Washington Post for the Comic Riffs blog that was founded by my good friend and colleague, Michael Kavna. So the very first time I interviewed Bendis about Miles Morales, when the interview ended, I said, look, Brian, I have to ask you. I'm like, it's great that he's Latino and Black. He's got a Latino mother, African-American father. I said, but what type of Latina is she? I said, because I said, one, you're in New York, so it's probably either Puerto Rican or Dominican, just if you're basing it off of demographics. But I said, it's really important for Latinos to know this, because I said to him, I am, I have one Puerto Rican parent and one African-American parent, and I really want to know what this kid is so I can know if I can start celebrating it. So Bendis was actually pretty taken aback by that. And I remember he said to me, he's like, wow, you are Miles Morales. He said, Miles's mother is Puerto Rican. He based the creation of that character, who we co-created with Sarah Pacelli, an Italian artist. He based the creation of that character on a real-life couple that he knew, African-American man, Puerto Rican woman. And that's kind of where it came from. And the reason they decided to make that Miles Morales Puerto Rican and African-American, they thought that was 2011. The Ultimate Comics line started in 2000. Miles came in 2011. And what Brian Bendis told me back then was we should have introduced Miles back in 2000, but nobody was ready to do that. Even though it was 21st century, 2000, turn of an era. He was like, when we first introduced the new Teenage Spider-Man in Ultimate Comics back in the year 2000, he said, that's when we should have introduced Miles, but we didn't do it. He said, looking at the demographics of New York, especially pre-gentrification, the likelihood that Spider-Man was going to be Puerto Rican or Dominican African-American was very high. He said we should have had a Spider-Man that reflected it back then.
So I have a question for you. So was Bendis saying in 2000, Miles Morales was born? Like he already existed? Somebody had already written him, created him, but he just wasn't displayed?
No, what he was saying is, it's really confusing because you're really getting into the minutia of what comic books are with alternate universes and things like that. But basically in the year 2000, Marvel Comics said, we're going to have this new publishing line alongside our mainstream universe where all our heroes are. And we're going to call it Ultimate Comics. And we're going to take new ideas and new ways to present the same characters that are over here. What Brian was saying is when Spider-Man debuted in Ultimate Comics, it was just a younger Peter Parker, who they eventually killed to make way for Miles. But what he was saying is when we introduced that young Peter Parker in 2000, we probably should have did Miles Morales back then, but they didn't.
I see.
So that's what he was saying.
I see. So
but
you have
Miles
this
is one of the biggest characters. He's just Miles is big time. I mean, the third Spiderverse movie, which will be out in a year or two, is one of the most anticipated things ever, and it's a big deal. Obviously, I'm very biased.
Of course you are. Of course you are. So since we just want to go there with the movies, the first film, which you educated me on shortly before we started recording this, was called Miles Morales. No, it wasn't. Spiderverse. No, it wasn't that either. Miles Morales Into the Spiderverse. Is that it?
It was called Spider-Man Into the Spiderverse.
Spider-Man Into the Spiderverse. Okay, that's the first film.
That's the first one that came out in 2018. Yes.
2018. Second one came out last year, 2023. Is that one called Miles Morales Across the Spider-Verse?
That one is also called Spider-Man, but it's Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse.
So the reason why I think I'm mixing it up as well is because when I saw last year's movie, 2023's Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse, I went to it thinking that Miles Morales was going to be the central character. That was the draw for me. And yes, he was. I would say he still was the central character. But you brought up something 5 years ago in your article with the Washington Post. The name of that article is Miles Morales is a Spider-Man who's biracial like me, so why wasn't I more excited for this movie? There's a part in this article where you talk about, and you're not referencing last year's film because obviously this article was written 5 years ago, but you talked about kind of an annoyance of having other Spider-Men being kind of caught up in this story of Miles Morales. Maybe you felt like Miles Morales was not the central figure, was not the number one, kind of on the call sheet. Am I reading that correctly?
I was going into writing that a little blind. And I say that because at the time that the first Spider-Verse movie was coming out with Miles Morales, we were at that point gearing up for our third live action iteration of Peter Parker Spider-Man, which we all recently saw in Spider-Man No Way Home. You've got Tobey Maguire from the first set of Spider-Man movies, then you've got Andrew Garfield from the reboot. He did 2 Spider-Man movies. Then you have Tom Holland, who's the Spider-Man of the Marvel Cinematic Universe joint venture between Sony and Disney Marvel Studios. There's something about the comic book fandom, and I'm guilty of this. We've gotten a little bougie with all these live action movies and taking over Hollywood, making $1 billion like Deadpool and Wolverine just did. I wanted to see a live action Miles Morales because we'd already seen 3 live action Peter Parkers. I'm like, man, you can't just make Miles the guy now in live action. But that was before I'd seen the movie. And I didn't realize that not only were they telling an incredible Miles Morales story, but Spider-Verse kind of rejuvenated animated movies. Animated superhero movies don't really get made. Animated superhero series barely. There's a new Batman series on Amazon, excluded, but you have to understand the timeline. 2018, that's like big time Avengers movies, Black Panther, like all this stuff was happening in live action. That was like $1 billion boom of a moment. And then you had like an animated movie. And for me, it just wasn't, it didn't have the je ne sais quoi, if you will, of, the live action was really flexing in 2018. Now in 2024, you've got people saying superhero fatigue, maybe, we need to kick back on all these superhero movies. But back in 2018, people couldn't get enough. even the critics were like along for the ride. So it was really just me being biased and spoiled and impatient, because if I just would have waited to see the movie, I would have seen how incredible it was and how genre redefining it was for animation.
Or would you be open to this? Would you be open to me possibly saying the biggest reason why you might have wanted to see a live action Miles Morales in Into the Spider-Verse is because you said you have a Puerto Rican mother, you have an African American father, you are Miles Morales, you are 3D.
Well, I
So, if
am.
anything,
I'm the switch of that. Miles is the
oh,
one with the Miles has a Puerto Rican mom, African American father. I have a Puerto Rican father, African American mother. But it's the same thing. Like me and Miles are literally
okay.
the exact same color, whatever the heck you want to do it.
Hmm.
So,
Hmm.
but yes, I think you kind of hit the nail on the head there with what, because I will say this: the only, I love movies. Part of the reason I got into writing about entertainment is because of how much I love entertainment in all its forms. You know how many times I've seen somebody that looked like me on TV? It's kind of hard when you're biracial.
Yeah.
You feel like you're being pulled in two different directions. But the first time I can truly say I saw myself in a movie, especially a superhero movie, was a Spider-Verse movie.
Hmm.
First time I was 31 years old when that movie came out.
31.
It's the first time I felt like I saw myself. I saw a kid with one Puerto Rican parent, one African American parent. He was bilingual, biracial. That's the first time I saw it. So of course I wanted to see that in live action because it's a depiction of my true self that I've really never seen, and honestly didn't think I'd ever see in comics or movies or anything unless I invented it myself. So I give a lot of props to Bendis and Pichelli for their creation of Miles.
So I have a gripe with Spanish language television and film. As someone who speaks Spanish as a second language, and for you, David, English and Spanish are both your maternal and paternal languages. I find it really, really difficult to find Spanish language TV with brown colored people like me. Culturally, of course, they're going to be different because they're not estadounidense, right? They're not from this country. But I know that people with my color or browner, they also speak Spanish. Lo and behold, you, David. Okay. And so when I think about Miles Morales and the first on screen iteration of him being animated and not live action, it makes me mad. It does. Because there really is a thirst for me to see people with my color speaking Spanish. And you clearly have a very similar thirst, especially because you are both African American and Puerto Rican. What do you think about that?
Well, it's nice to know I'm not the only person that noticed how Latin American media is, but that's kind of a not the best kept secret that Latin American media, whether it be Telemundo, Univision,
Mm-hmm.
even the current streamers that are out there, VIX and Pantalla, uh, it's not really a true representation of the social makeup of what Latin America really is. Um, Blackness in Latin America is a very difficult topic. The very first Miles Morales comic I ever wrote for Marvel was Miles having a talk with the Black Panther about wanting to express his Latino identities. Like, people know I'm Black, people don't know I'm Latino. I want to let them know, how do I do it? And they had this convo about how the African diaspora in Latin America, you know, it's not the same as what we as African Americans are. Like, as African Americans, we are culture trend setters. Like, we set
Amen.
the bar on everything. We're the most copied and imitated people in the damn Milky Way. And
Get the galaxy right.
that's something I'm very proud of. My wife is from the Dominican Republic. She's Afro Latina. She's not African American. And I have this convo with her all the time, like stuff that we do here in the States, styles we do, haircuts, shoes we wear, ends up in over there in the Caribbean and Latin America because we are so influential, and that makes me so proud to be African American and be Black, but especially a Black American, because I know I'm preaching to the choir here, but when it comes to style, when it comes to entertainment, when it comes to music, when it comes to just what's cool, like, we are there. But when you go over to Latin America, Blackness has a whole kind of separate meaning. It's kind of like this thing that no one wants to talk about, and everyone kind of almost not. I'm not putting everyone in it, but there's a lot of anti-Blackness in America. Now it's gotten a lot better. Social media has helped give voice to many of the Black Latinos in Latin America that are out there that are saying, "Hey, I'm here, and this is who I am." Honestly, I think characters like Miles go a long way in helping that. But you're right, Jen. There's part of the reason I wanted to see Miles in live action is because we just don't see many Afro-Latino characters in general. Generally, when you see a Latino, the crazy thing about Hollywood is there are Latino roles out there, but then, like, for example, Roberto Duran, Roberto Duran, one of the greatest boxers ever, Panamanian guy. They got a Venezuelan actor, I think, to play him. La Bamba, one of my favorite movies ever. I used to watch that movie. That was my first introduction to Spanish music and staying at my Puerto Rican grandparents' house. And, every time La Bamba came on HBO, we watched it together. And my grandmother remembered when Richie Valens died. Lou Diamond Phillips isn't even Latino. He's Filipino. That's the way Hollywood historically has treated.
Wait a minute, excuse me? Sorry. Lou Diamond Phillips is not Latino? Are you for real?
Let me see here. Lou Diamond.
He is he 100% Filipino?
His father was an American of Scot-Irish and Cherokee descent, and he was born in the Philippines. Yeah, but he's not Mexican. And I
have been thinking he has been Mexican for 40 years.
It's just like life. Everyone, I have Puerto Rican members of my family who think that J-Lo is Mexican because she played Selena. You know what I mean? It just never, like, when it comes to Latin America, it's always like anyone will do. And I've spoken to Latino producers in Hollywood about this. They say there are too many other bigger battles to fight to worry about. Oh, well, if they're going to make a Sonia Sotomayor movie and they get a Cuban woman to play her, we can't worry about the fact that the actress is Cuban. We just got to throw a Puerto Rican flag on her and call it a day. That's kind of honestly why, and maybe it's a good thing that it was animated first, because in animated form, you can see a Puerto Rican mom, you can see an African-American dad, and you can see that's what Miles is. But I would argue Miles is one of the most recognizable Afro-Latino characters in the history of entertainment, because it's just something we don't normally see that much.
Thank you for that. Okay. I want to go into this scene a little bit more. Not scene. Well, what would I call it a scene? Now I need language for comic books, because you talked about, I think, scene. Let me know if that's right. You wrote a scene where Miles Morales is talking to Black Panther about his heritage, right? I just want to hear a little bit more detail as to what that conversation was like, and how did you write Black Panther's response? Like, what were you sort of informed by to be able to?
That was, first of all, a lot of fun. The thing about writing comics is,
and let me know which comic that was. What was the name of it?
So that comic was a comic published by Marvel Comics called Marvel Voices Comunidades. And there are these anthology series that Marvel do from time to time that are geared towards Black readers, that are geared towards Latino readers, that are geared towards the LGBTQ community. So in this case, they were doing a Latino anthology. That means, multiple stories in there, and they wanted all the writers and artists to be Latino. So Marvel reached out, and I said I wanted to do Miles, and if I could do Miles, I would definitely do it. And that's how that came about. Now, in terms of what they talked about, obviously when you're dealing with the Black Panther, you're dealing with African royalty, you're dealing with an unconquerable nation that's never dealt with colonization. And They wear the pride of their Africanness and their blackness on their sleeves, literally. Um, but basically, so I'm really proud of that story because if they're in the Miles Morales video game and the Spider-Man video game for PlayStation 5, you can always change a suit. You can like win these new suits the more you play the game. And one of the suits in there is a Puerto Rico suit, where it's a Spider-Man suit, but the chest has like the Puerto Rican flag on it. That suit came from my comic. They plucked it from there and put it in the video game. And what that suit is the result of Miles and the Black Panther having a conversation where he basically said to the Black Panther, when people see you, you're covered head to toe in your Black Panther suit, but people still know you're Wakandan. People still know you come from Africa. He's like, when I wear my Spider-Man suit, if my suit tears, people can see my black skin and they just say, oh, Spider-Man's black. He's like, but I also have one parent that is Latino, comes from Puerto Rico. He's like, how can I wear who I am like on my sleeve the way you do? So in the comic, the Black Panther has Shuri make the Puerto Rico suit for him, and he ends the story swinging over a Puerto Rican parade in the suit saying, Yo soy Boricua, pa que tú lo sepas, great Puerto Rican saying. But the combo they have is a difficult one because the Black Panther basically says, blacks in America have done a great job with their identity and letting people know who they are. And he said, that's, basically saying that's amazing considering that the original journey of Africans to the United States, that's a story of a group of Africans in the hundreds of thousands. There are millions of black people that went to Latin America via slavery. Like literally 10 times as many Africans went to South America. Yet, which place has become the epicenter of black culture and black pride? Right? It's up here because down there, you're dealing with so much anti-blackness in Latin America that it's easier. You gotta. Well, I don't even want to get into the dynamics of how that's handled, but it's a much more difficult conversation within the Latin American community. So basically, they come to an agreement. He's like, "Hey, I'm going to help you build a suit. My sister Shuri is going to help you build a suit that can help let people know that Spider-Man is black and also, Puerto Rican and Boricua." And that's kind of how the story came about. It was a story I always wanted to tell. I do, as I take a lot of pride in being one of the few Puerto Ricans that have been that have been able to write Miles Morales. And not that I have complaints about the character, but if someone isn't from that culture, not to say, oh, you're not Puerto Rican and black, you can't write Miles Morales. That's not what I'm saying, because that's never going to be the case 9 times out of 10. But when you do actually come from that background, you can add certain things to where people can say, oh, this kid has a little sazon. He understands the culture a little bit. At the end of the day, a comic book is a comic book. People want to see Spider-Man pick a car up off of his, and bench it over his head and throw it at a bad guy and be a superhero and be super strong. Those are the things that make comic books. You only have certain little windows where you can get a little extra personal, especially when it comes to cultural identity. But with my first, go with Miles, I wanted to do that, and happy that I did.
I think it's incredible that at 31 you discovered that you were introduced and that you accepted this new iteration of Spider-Man. And with him being Puerto Rican and Black American, I think it just speaks a lot, again, to the thirst that we were talking about. I do want to say, though, yes, a comic book is a comic book, but whoever's writing it really does matter, because there's an intimacy that you have with the character that cannot be replicated by someone like me, and I'm 100% Black American, somebody like Stan Lee, rest in peace, who is, I believe Stan Lee is Jewish, right? So I think it is very, very important that we have your voice in this character of Miles Morales. I really do. My question is, are you the only Puerto Rican writer, or even the only Black and Puerto Rican writer that is helping to sort of mold this character of Miles Morales?
There have been multiple black writers, African American writers, who've had a chance to write Miles, from Jason Reynolds, um, and
Oh,
they're
no offense, David. I don't mean Black American. No, 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 no. Puerto Rican or Puerto Rican and Black American. Any writers
you mean
like that?
specifically someone who specifically is Miles. As far as I know, I may have been the first in terms of someone to completely identify with Miles. That was actually one of my pitches, because I initially wasn't going to get Miles in my first story because somebody else was pitching a Miles story. And I kind of said, hey, you guys are coming to me for a Latino anthology, and I am half Puerto Rican, half African American. I'm like, the answer is clear who I should be writing. And they agreed, and it showed up great. So in terms of anyone else, maybe there's been someone since. I know Cody Ziegler is writing Miles right now. I don't think he's Puerto Rican. He's black. But if there is, I'd have to go back and look. But I do. I feel pretty confident saying I might have been the first to write.
So, to your knowledge, Mr. David Betancourt is the only Puerto Rican and
Not
Black
that I should
American.
be the only. I hope I'm one of many.
Exactly. That is the hope. But you, Mr. David Betancourt, is the first, and right now only, Black and Puerto Rican writer that is helping to shape Miles Morales. I think that's beautiful. Okay, we spent a lot of time here. I do think it is so important, though. But we will move on. What makes Miles Morales so special as a Spider-Man? From what I know, like, my Spider-Man growing up was Tobey Maguire, okay? This Tom Holland business, he's fine, but I love me some Tobey, okay? They all seem to be, doing the same thing, shooting spider webs out of their wrists. They have this really cool costume. I think they're all teenagers, right? But what besides Miles's, heritage, what kind of makes this Spider-Man special?
I think they did a really good job in realizing when they were creating a new Spider-Man, it was going to need to be more than just who was under the mask. And Marvel and Brian Michael Bendis, Sarah Pichelli did a great job of coming up with some new powers. Miles can do things that a lot of the other Spider-Men can't. He can camouflage and sort of almost make himself invisible, blending into his environment like many spiders can. He's got a venom blast where, if you're getting too close, he can tap you and send a jolt of electricity. I think even now in the comics, he can now take that energy that he can produce and turn it into like a sword or something like that. So they've done a pretty good, he's a very unique Spider-Man from his power set as well. Obviously, he can, he's got the super strength. He can crawl. He's got a spider sense. All the template Spider-Man stuff is there. But they have done a pretty good job of giving him, some extra special powers that are just unique to him.
Awesome. We're going to go back a little bit to the actors. In the... Oh, God, here we go again with the name of this movie. Okay, so last year's movie is called Spider-Man Across the Spiderverse. Yes?
There you go.
Okay.
All right.
Across the Spiderverse. Okay. The actor that voiced Miles Morales is Shameik Moore.
Shameik Moore, yes.
Shameik Moore, who I know from Dope, the movie. And I thought Shameik did, a decent job. However, in your opinion, who should it have been?
I think in terms of who it should have been, I honestly think Shameik did a really good job. And I think that because we're 2 movies deep and we've got 1 more to go, the bottom line is Shameik's voice is who we hear when we think of Miles. It's funny because when I look at Shameik as an actor, like you mentioned, he was in Dope, I don't see him with that voice. Like, even when I hear him talking in interviews, like, I can't hear Miles. It's almost like he's doing something else with his voice when he becomes Miles. And I think, voice acting is not easy. But I think he does a pretty good job with it. Would I have liked for them to have gotten a Puerto Rican and an African American actor? Of course I would have, because I'm all about authenticity. Would I have liked for that person to have been me? Absolutely. I wish they would have called me, but that did not happen. And I think Shameik did a more than adequate job.
Are there any Black and Puerto Rican actors out there that could have done this?
We're out there in the Spiderverse. Obviously, in the New York area, I think that's a mix that happens a lot more frequently than, say, here in Washington, where I'm from. But I really think, they did do a good job of getting Lauren, who's Lauren Luna. Yeah, Luna Lauren Velez, who's the voice of Miles's mother. She is a Puerto Rican woman. Obviously, I'm old enough. I remember her when she was big time on New York Undercover back in the day. I don't think you're that old to remember that show, but when I was a young whippersnapper.
Of course I do.
Yeah,
I was watching TV I wasn't supposed to watch. Yes.
So,
yes.
I mean, they've got Brian Tyree Henry as a dad, Luna as the mom, great African-American actor, great Puerto Rican actress. So I think finding a kid who was Black and Puerto Rican that could voice that and was an actor and had the skill and could do it, is that kid out there? Probably. Did they have the resources to find him? Probably not. But I'm pretty, I think the voice cast is great. I do wish, there is a wish for me that if part of what makes a character so big is what their identity is, and let's face it, a big part of why Miles is so popular is because, the Latino community can grab onto him, the African American community can grab onto him, biracial people can grab onto him. People, I once talked to Simu Liu, Shang-Chi, for a story I did, and he was telling me how much he loved Spider-Verse just because there were scenes where his mom would be talking to him in Spanish and he's kind of answering back in English. And he said, that was like me and my Chinese parents. So Miles is very, very relatable, I think, in that sense.
So we have 2 films in the can now for Miles Morales, right?
Yes.
From what I've been reading, the next one is on pause indefinitely because of the strikes. Is that correct?
I know there were some delays. I don't think they're going to hit the release date that they wanted. As far as I know, it's supposed to come out in let's see here, Beyond the Spider.
And is it supposed to be animated as well?
Yes.
Okay.
It is going to conclude the animated trilogy.
Okay.
So let's see here. So yeah, there's maybe that film comes out in 2025.
Yeah.
But these movies take a long time to make. Yeah. And there were delays because of the strike. I think that's over now, and they've gotten back to work. But yeah, it's going to be a while, but I think it's going to be worth the wait. Rarely are the third movie in trilogies any good, and I think this is going to be like this great animated exclamation point, and rarity when the third movie might be the most popular one.
I did feel like when I watched last year's Across the Spider-Verse that it didn't really have an ending, right? Like no, I felt like it was very anticlimactic. So yeah. Now let's talk about that.
When you saw it, did you see it in a theater or did you see it at home?
I saw it in a theater.
So there are a lot of people that didn't realize that from the jump, that they said Spider-Verse was going to be a trilogy. So a lot of people thought the movie was going to end with Across the Spider-Verse. So when that cliffhanger ending happened, there were literally kids in my theater screaming, like the movie's over. And but no, it is going to be a trilogy. It was always intended to be that. But that second movie is like 2.5 hours long. And that's kind of like a tall tale sign that it was a great movie because people didn't want it to end, at least in the multiple times I saw it in theaters. and the reaction was always the same from the kids when you got this cliffhanger, the Prowler version of Miles taking off his mask and having the same face but cornrows. Uh, that was some pretty awesome stuff. But yeah, it was always intended to be a trilogy, but not a lot of people knew that when it ended.
Yeah, I definitely didn't know it was going to be a trilogy. But even with you saying that, we've had trilogies before in film, and every single film, stood up and there was a beginning, a middle, and an end. So I just didn't understand the storytelling, like why they chose to tell the story in that way, to not really follow the structure. I don't want to hear kids screaming, talking about, is that it? Who wants that? They even knew, there was no sort of resolve or conclusion. So I'm wondering, like, why they chose that storytelling mechanism.
This is a very big story they're telling. They're using a theatrical platform, which gives you at most 2.5 hours. And I think they just realized that they were going to have to tell it in three parts. The first part establishes that there is a Spider-Verse. The second part establishes that the Spider-Verse is in trouble, and Miles has got this kind of evil twin out there in another world. And the third one is them trying to save everybody. So I think also don't forget there's so many characters. There's so many different Spider-Men, and every single Miles is the nucleus, but you've got Spider-Pig and Spider-Man Noir and all these other characters. Spider-Man 2099 and Gwen Stacy's Spider-Woman. In order to give everybody a little bit of shine, you're not going to be able to tell that story in 2 hours. So given the vastness of the universe we're being introduced to, I can kind of understand why they said, hey, we're going to have to break this up in three and tell it in 3 2.5 hour slots.
Or it should have been a series. How about that?
They've clearly hit a chord with you, and they're going to have to reach out to you and resolve this because you were clearly perturbed by this.
I am. I was. It was a beautiful movie. Okay. I go not even having any expectations. I'm like, I'm really into this, It takes a lot for me to get into animation because I can't take it seriously as an adult. So then when I, started watching and the story's good and then it ends up ending the way it did, it pissed me off because
a lot of people were angry. Yeah.
It pissed me off. Felt like one of those kids, but I couldn't holler. That's not it's not socially acceptable at all. Okay. All right. I want to play maybe a fun little game with you.
Okay.
And I'm going to be making it up on the spot because I was trying to figure out how to incorporate a game and I couldn't, but it's just going to come to me. Okay. This is going to be a versus. Okay. This is going to be.
Are we going to rap? Are we going to battle?
we're not going to battle.
Okay.
We're going to choose.
I don't have my rapping hat on, but I do it if you need me to.
Is it near? Because maybe you will need to grab it. You might need to grab it in a second. So we're going to do a little versus among the Spider-Men. Okay. You let me know which one you think could take the other. Okay?
Oh, wow. Okay.
Okay.
This is actually fun. Okay.
Okay, cool. Okay, so we are going to, I'm going to just open it up. Miles Morales and Peter Parker, the original Peter Parker.
Oh my God. Out of sheer bias, I cannot go against Miles. Like, I've been waiting for Miles my whole life. The correct answer is Peter Parker because he's the more experienced Spider-Man. He's been doing it from the time he was a teenager to he's now an adult. He knows all the tricks of the trade. He's seen everything. Miles has been around 10 years. He's still kind of learning things about being a hero. I'm going to pick Miles out of my sheer Puerto Rican and African-American bias, but the smart, correct answer would have been Peter Parker there. But I'm not picking Peter. I'm picking Miles.
Okay, we're picking Miles. All right, on to the next one. Miles Morales versus Lady Spider.
Ooh, Spider-Gwen?
Yeah.
If we're basing it off of the movies, Gwen has kind of like got a handle on being a spider person a little more than Miles does. I'm going to say this one is a push, and that no one's going to win because it's pretty clear they have feelings for each other, and that's going to get in the way of somebody actually winning.
Now, all is fair in love and war, okay?
Which is why you got to separate work from love. You know, that's why I never dated anybody I worked with. You got to keep that stuff out of there.
I don't think that's a fair answer, and I'm not going to allow you to do it. Okay, I'm just not going to allow you to do it. You have to choose. Okay, Miles Morales or Gwen. I feel like you're really leaning toward Gwen, and you just don't want to say Gwen.
Yeah, I mean, because if we're basing it off so Gwen in the movies is already in the Spider Society. She's the one that brings Miles there and says, "Hey, we've got this whole Spider-Man universe going." Miles didn't know any of that stuff, and part of it because he has this kind of like tragic connection to all of that.
This pains you to say.
I mean, if we're just basing it off the first two movies, I'm going to give it to Gwen because she's more ahead of the game than Miles is. Maybe that changes by the time the third movie's out, but we haven't seen the third movie yet. I think by the third movie, Miles is going to be like the greatest Spider-Man ever, but he's not there yet in the movies.
Okay. So based off of sheer inexperience in this case, right?
Well, Gwen is kind of running laps around him as a Spider-Person in the second movie. She knows more about what's really going on than he does.
Okay. Gwen versus, and this is my favorite Spider-Man only because I couldn't understand what he was saying. Hobie, is that his name? Hobie Brown? Hobie Brown? Is it Hobie or Hobby? So Hobie Gwen Brown versus Hobie.
Again, this is kind of a situation where it was kind of hinted at that there was something going on there. So are they really going to be fighting? Because Hobie seems to be the man.
Wait, what? What?
Remember in the movie where she's like, "Oh yeah, I've kind of been hanging out with this Hobie guy," and Miles was like, "Oh, what's that all about?"
I don't recall. I did not recall.
Go back and look at the kind of innuendo in terms of like how Miles views Gwen hanging out with Hobie. But I'm going to take Hobie just because my daughter loves Spider-Punk. I almost wore my Spider-Punk t-shirt. Hobie's just really damn cool. Plus, he's voiced by Daniel
Kaluuya.
Yes, and he does such a great job.
He really does. He really does.
I'm going with Hobie. Spider-Punk.
Okay. Last one. I don't know his official Spider-Man name, but I'm going to identify him by where he's from. So correct me, okay? So we have Spider-Punk versus the Indian Spider-Man.
That Spider-Man from India was pretty, like, he had his stuff together pretty good. He was very cool, very charismatic. Was noted he had great hair and only used natural products. I love that they got that in there. Yes. But I'm still going with Hobie. I think Hobie might be the toughest dude in there.
We're going with Hobie. Okay, then Hobie's got it. Out of all of them, Hobie's got it. I think I'm missing one that was voiced by Amandla Steinberg, but we're going with Hobie. We're going with Punk, Spider-Punk. I like that.
Yeah, okay. Spider-Punk probably beats everybody. He's got a guitar. He can hit you over the head with it. So,
But this comes with an asterisk because you're saying by the next film, right?
I think Miles is going to ascend, He's going to greatness by the third film.
Okay. Well, we're going to wrap it up, but is there anything else you want to add about Miles Morales?
His existence is truly one of the greatest surprises of my life. I've always had, as someone who aspires to create works of fiction one day, either through comic books or whatever medium, I've always envisioned characters like myself in the stuff I want to create, just because I've never seen characters like myself anywhere else. So when I first found out who Miles was, I wasn't even at the Washington Post. I took a 3-year break from the Post. I was in government contracting. I was on an Army base. The news hit. A colleague of mine from the Post called me and said, "Have you seen the news?" And like it totally rocked my world. I remember calling my parents. Obviously, I ended up writing about it. Miles's existence is one of the great pop culture moments of my life, and it means a lot to me that I've been able to write a little corner of his universe from my perspective. It's one of the great honors of my life.
Beautiful. I have one more question. It just popped into my head.
Sure.
Why does Miles have his mother's last name? What is that about?
So that, Jeff, Miles's father, and his brother used to get into some real shenanigans back in the day. Now, in the comics, I know, because see, in the movie, Jeff is a policeman. And it's kind of insinuated that him and his brother were knuckleheads when they were younger. In the comics, I think there's more of a secret agent kind of thing where Jeff was like doing some crazy work, and it was a move to protect Miles by giving him the last name Morales instead of Davis. So that's kind of they've never really gotten into it in the movies, but in the comics, they've kind of insinuated that it was done to kind of distance Miles from Jeff in case any of Jeff's old work came to cause trouble.
This is another reason why if they ever do a live action, I am calling for Marvel to cast either a completely brown-skinned Puerto Rican or David Betancourt. Okay, it's either one of those. it's either one of those. Okay, we're not taking anything else. Okay,
I'm gonna have to do a lot more Pilates and yoga if that happens.
Listen, get ready. They about to call you. They're about to CGI you up, about to turn you.
Oh, 15, make me younger like they did Michael Douglas? Yeah.
Like they did Michael Douglas, yes. Luckily you're not as old as that.
Right.
Yes. David Betancourt are fully Puerto Rican, okay? It's going down. It's going down. For the people, David, please let us know how we can find your work. Tell us all the comics that you have written and your social media, please.
So I've written multiple Miles Morales comics for Marvel Comics, mainly in the Marvel Voices Comunidades series for Marvel Comics. I have my first Miles prose book coming out in October. It's an anthology that I contributed to called Stories from the Spiderverse. I wrote the Miles Morales story. In that book, it's actually a story where Miles and his mother Rio go to Puerto Rico to reconnect with the island. It's probably one of the most proudest things I've ever worked on in terms of Miles. I do have some other projects coming along that I can't talk about yet, but you can follow me on a DC Fanboy on X/Twitter or David Betancourt Writes on Instagram. And I'm always putting whatever I'm working on next on there.
Wait a minute. I was just about to end it. And you said a DC fanboy. Listen, what is that about? Okay, you're up here writing about a Marvel comic and you have a DC fanboy. Well, what's up with that?
People always clown me for that, but the DC stands for District of Columbia, where I'm from. Because,
my bad.
Because we, as a people, always say DC. Like, that's why I didn't say a Washington fanboy, which would have been really long. But no, I get that a lot. So you're not the first person to try and beat me over the head about that.
You might need to change it. Because yes, I was side-eyeing you. I was like, what? But it has been truly a pleasure talking to you about all things Miles Morales. So glad to know you. So glad to call you my friend.
This was great. Yeah.
Thank you so much to our guests for joining me, and thank you for listening. This episode was edited by Edonis Bacaj, hosted and executive produced by me, Jennifer Brown, produced by Latrice Lauve, and distributed by Black-owned Productions. I hope you'll join me again on another episode. The Curiosity Podcast is a safe space to not only explore my curiosity of all the things, but yours as well. And together, we get to dig a little deeper as to why that curiosity exists in the first place.